And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, the creator of the Cerulean Seas Under Sea campaign setting, now making the leap from Pathfinder to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the one and only Emily Kubisz. How you doing tonight?
Hi, nice to be here. Pretty good.
So, I'll start off with the humble beginnings tradition, as I often do around here.
Sure.
Walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Oh, wow. That goes way back. We're talking, I've been in the early 80s in grade school. Mm-hmm. And back in that time, it was kind of like a taboo thing to do because you had, all the satanic panic and stuff going on at that time. And parents didn't very much want you to play it. So it was kind of like, well, if you're kind of a nerdy rebel, you go off and play Dungeons and Dragons. And I guess that kind of appealed to me. Plus, I like the mythology. I think before that, as a littler kid, I was into like magicians and magic tricks and stuff like that. So I kind of liked that kind of ethos anyway. And when Dungeons and Dragons, you got to play a wizard and stuff like that, or build your own world. And of course, in the beginning, you don't follow the rules. You have a lot of the books, but you don't actually read them, and you just sort of wing everything. And it just stuck. And people liked the stories I began to create, and that kind of encouraged me as well. And then right around high school, I actually started reading the books and started coming up with rules and writing, and the rest is history there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. I mean, most people when they first get billed on the idea of playing as whatever form of fantasy you happen to get introduced to the genre with, whether it be certain cartoons, whether it be certain films and whatnot.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you already had some media of fantasy that you were exposed to at that point. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that was back in the Conan the Barbarian, Beastmaster. Of course, Dungeons and Dragons cartoon was out at that time. Yeah.
So yeah, we had He-Man. We had all the great stuff in that time.
But we do have a professional understanding that we are never to speak of Beastmaster 2.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's much like the that Highlander that never happened.
Uh, I suppose an even better example would be we don't talk about Conan the Destroyer.
Oh yeah, there's another one. Damn, there's some bad sequels out there.
Yeah. Or I was gonna say we don't talk about Red Sonja, but I think Schwarzenegger has the best take on Red Sonja, where he claimed that whenever his kids were acting out of line, he said, if you don't act up, we're gonna go down to the theater room and watch Red Sonja. Which, could be spinning a yarn, but on the other hand, I'm like, is that borderline child abuse?
Perhaps. I mean, there's worse movies, I guess.
Yeah, especially around that time, you could, if I wanted to threaten somebody, I could say, if you don't act up, we're gonna go to the living room and watch Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Yeah, there's some bad ones.
Oh. Oh, I was gonna say The Room, but no, people like The Room's badness, so that doesn't really work.
Yeah, some were so bad that they became classics, and people formed a following around them.
I liken it to a car crash. Even if you know it's a bad thing, you can't help but watch.
Oh yeah.
Or if I have to use a sports example, I'll use the Chicago White Sox this year, where they were a perfect bad team. Nothing was working, and they end up setting the modern losing record in baseball.
Yeah. Sometimes you could just be so bad that you actually are good in that way. So.
I remember a broadcaster holding up a cactus and saying, "I'm going to sit on this. That might hurt a little less than watching this team." Which,
that's true.
I do not endorse sitting on cacti. I'm just going to make that clear.
No, not at all.
Yeah, but now with Cerulean Seeds, this particular campaign setting, I think before we even get into its incarnation with Pathfinder and its incarnation in the works with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I'd like to go into
you went out. You clicked out here for a minute. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Oh,
yeah, we phased out for a second there.
Yeah, I'll chalk it up to connections being weird. But
that's fine.
What I'd want to go into is kind of the inspirations, the Appendix N for it. You know, Appendix N being that collection in like early D&D books of the different inspirations and all that. Different recommended media, essentially. What would be some of the things in the Appendix N for Cerulean Seeds?
Well, I mean, what got me into the ocean and stuff is back in the times when I started gaming and reading in general. I began reading about all these undersea habitat and species, and it became kind of like an obsession of mine to learn about this kind of thing. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid, a lot, until I realized I was afraid of suffocation, and I'd barely put my head underwater, so that didn't work out. But I did learn a lot about the undersea life and had a huge amount of respect for it. Again, the aquarium hobby and that sort of thing. So I had a lot of knowledge built up in that. So I had my two passions going on, the gaming, and I had this undersea. And when I first started writing, I was working for a company called Mystic Eye Games. They're not around anymore. They did a series called Nightmares and Dreams and a few other things. But one of the things they came up when I had the pleasure of working on was called. Oh man, now I can't even remember. I think it was called The Sea or something like well, The Deep. That's what it was. And it was a source book, kind of like Cerulean Seas. It wasn't very comprehensive. And in my opinion, in retrospect, it probably wasn't very well done because we kind of rushed it out at that time. But it definitely laid some of the groundwork for Cerulean Seas. But you take there's a lot of when you're designing these games and think about there's a lot of tropes that you build up and things from like the Little Mermaid where you have like an undersea community of mermaids and stuff going. There's a lot of cartoons and media out there that kind of touches on the sort of undersea environment mixed with fantasy. Jules Verne's Thousand Links Under the Sea, and there's quite a few fringe fantasy elements that have to do with the ocean. And we pull from all of that. And we created even more. So there's actually in Cerulean Seas there is a lot of science. So anytime there's something new discovered, we're like, hey, we could use this. We can make this something cool. So I watched a lot of nature documentaries and I talked to a lot of experts. And then we also try to include like world cultures. There's a lot of cultures actually thrive and depend on the ocean and aquatic habitats for their way of life. And I made a lot of friends worldwide while I was doing my research because I do interviews and research that involves talking to a lot of different people. Because I don't, for one, I like it's kind of, especially nowadays, it's kind of a slippery road when you're trying to incorporate other cultures. You don't want to do any sort of like appropriation or you don't want to treat the culture like some sort of way of making money or anything like that. But you do what I want to look at. I kind of look at it as I want to honor the culture in the way they would like to be honored. So I do talk to members of that anytime I'm going to include something from that culture. I do talk to members from that particular culture or society. I try to do it the best way I can. Now, obviously, it's impossible not to do something that may, make someone unhappy. But I do my best to keep it kosher with everybody.
And you can't please everyone, and
you can't.
No matter what, there's going to be somebody who's like, "Oh, you didn't do it completely accurately." But I've
right.
The approach I've taken is that, and this is my approach on this personally, is at the end of the day, even if it's referencing or homaging certain cultures, you're not playing as those cultures.
Right. No. Yeah. It's something we put in there too. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's based on that culture, or it's sort of like flavored with that in a lot of ways, in a respectful way.
For example, if I'm running, say, Black Void, that has a lot of elements of Sumerian culture within it, but it's not. You're not playing in ancient Sumeria. You're not even playing on in Earth and that kind of thing, and that's. When the realism argument is brought up, that's something I think a lot of people forget. Is that
exactly.
At the end of, I mean, I've been a big fan of Legend of the Five Rings for a good amount of my life, but I have to keep reminding people this is not attempting or has any interest in being a realistic depiction of feudal Japan in any era.
Exactly.
It is depicting Rokugan. Rokugan has certainly elements of different parts of feudal Japan, but it's its own culture, its own history, all of that stuff.
Right.
Plus the
sort of flavored.
Yeah. And
the feudal Japan. Yeah.
In the same way that Middle Earth isn't trying to be the British Isles.
Right. Exactly.
But now, with that in mind, I think one of the big takeaways that I remember when I first came across Cerulean Seas in its original form was doing 3D combat. Would you say that was relatively easy to pull off back with Pathfinder 1E, or was it tricky to do?
It's still tricky, even with second edition. Especially when you're in an environment which is almost always 3D. You have to think in 3 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is still very 2 dimensional, and it does require a little way of different way of thinking. Because you got to think up, down, and all the other cardinal directions. Because essentially everyone can fly because you can swim when you're underwater. Um, so yeah, it was a bit tricky, especially most people like to visualize it with miniatures. We had to come up with a system that would allow for miniatures, and we designed these what we call tracker trees, and I still use them to this day for just about everything that requires height or flying or swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple to make, and anyone can make them at home. And it basically requires a dowel rod in the center, and you have these squares, and you put it on there in a little clothespin, and you just glue the clothespin to these squares, and it goes up and down. And you can put congratulations on the dowel rod little marks. And you can get really fancy. I've made them out of acrylic, clear acrylic, so you can't really, you see through them and so on. But you can just use cardboard and dowel rod as well, and it works just fine. And wooden clothespins. And it's an easy way to move up and down. And of course, you can move the whole with the tracker tree side to side, and it works out good. And before that, it was trying to stack up those little things that come in pizza boxes, those things that help the cardboard up. Yeah, we'd stack those up or stack up blocks and stuff like that. That'd always be a little tricky, or dice. How many d6s can you stack? Yeah. So that the traditional way of doing it is using that, or but the tracker trees work out pretty good. And then you have to rethink some of the spells, because a lot of these spells and other effects are very 2 dimensional. And you have to think in a little bit more 3 dimensional terms.
And since you're
Kind of
dealing
hard.
with underwater, you also have to, I'd imagine you had to come up with a whole system regarding underwater explosions.
Yeah, underwater explosions, pressure,
Mm-hmm.
drag. There's a lot of effects. Now, I think we did a pretty good job with it, but like encumbrance, it kind of gets thrown out the window a lot of times because it does get complicated, and it can detract from play if you, I guess, concentrate or focus on it too much.
Mm-hmm.
So one of our main goals in the second edition is to streamline these. And we're still in the playtesting phase, but we did come up with a system so far that's taking into account pressure and drag that isn't too much of a drag. And we're hoping that people will be a little happier with it, because that was one of the criticisms of the original Cerulean season. Pressure system, drag, current, it can get a little too complicated at times.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Especially since I think when it comes to explosions, that's something that a lot of people will be more familiar with, like an exploding barrel just from decades of video games and the like, than they will be
Right.
with how damaging, say, depth charges can be.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Um, yeah. That definitely the science works a little differently underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, like in Indigo Ice, we wanted to come up with a firearm. Bullets work very differently underwater. People don't realize this. If you shoot a regular bullet into the water, it'll only go, a couple feet, and then it loses all its power and is dead. But you can design bullets that do work just fine underwater. And it basically creates a supercavitation bubble in front of a bullet. And basically, so the bullet's essentially traveling through steam or air, so it doesn't get slowed down
Yeah.
by the water, and it works just fine. But it's just a different shaped bullet, basically, kind of shaped like a nail.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you have to have a different system that doesn't rely on gunpowder and stuff like that, because obviously can't get gunpowder wet. So we actually came up with a system that somewhat scientific. There's some magic involved, of course, but it's
Mhm.
somewhat scientific that works under the water
Yeah.
for firearms.
Oh, I can
That
certainly get that, and I'd imagine recoil would be would work differently as well.
oh yeah. Well, some of I mean, if you did everything hyper realistic,
Mhm.
it does take some of the fun out of the game. So
Yep.
some of these things you have to kind of have that sort of suspension of disbelief and the sort of fantasy element where people are ignoring the science of it to some extent to make it fun. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Rollmaster and all the different charts and so on.
Oh yes,
Uh,
I am. I'm very familiar with Rollmaster, and it's
right.
endless charts upon charts upon charts. To the, I mean,
Just books
yes,
of charts.
it was
And that's the other extreme of it. I mean, yes, you can get it hyper realistic and you can try to account for everything, but then you're taking the fun out of it.
a lot of those
So,
there was a massive boner in the '90s for hyper realistic games that a lot of
mm,
them have not aged all that well. I've talked
no,
about
yeah.
Phoenix Command over the years and how that game is my whipping boy, and I've stated I will not run Phoenix Command again unless I am handsomely paid hazard pay. Uh, I briefly talked about it when I brought up how the Alien RPG by Free League is the second attempt at that, because the first one used Phoenix Command's rules, and same principle, I will not run it again. As far as
Right.
how much it would cost to get me to run it, it's if you have to ask, you can't afford it. That's my asking price with that thing. Uh,
Sounds about right.
and in the case, I always laugh at the when you brought up Rollmaster. I always laugh at the fact that the MERP game, Middle Earth Roleplay, technically is using a simplified version of Rollmaster,
Yes, it is.
which,
Yep.
if you've read MERP, you know why that's absolutely hilarious. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
although, I've used Rollmaster as an example of house ruling your way into making a game, because that's basically
Yeah,
what
that's
happened.
true.
Uh,
Mm, oh, yeah.
yeah, Arms Law was a collection of AD&D house rules, and then it just spiraled out of that confinement. Uh,
Into ridiculousness, yes.
yeah, uh,
But
I
yeah.
I will eventually try and cover the history of Rollmaster, but I don't. I dread doing that as much as I dreaded doing the retrospective on Traveler.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I will admit, when you mentioned the whole thing of rethinking bullets, I realized that there was one real world firearm that might have a better chance in underwater. Are you familiar with the gyrojet pistol?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's a rocket gun.
Hmm.
That's basically
Yeah.
what it is.
That would probably work underwater because the drag would be canceled out by its propulsion.
Mhm.
So,
But there is, I mean, obviously, when it comes to things like spells, I'm guessing that a lot of the existing spells in, say, Pathfinder had to be either either reworked, reflavored, or in some cases just tossed.
yeah. Fire spells, for example, don't quite work the same. A
Hmm.
lot of those were converted to steam spells.
Hmm.
Electricity, also a similar thing because it kind of just goes into a conductive environment. So a lot of electricity stuff is area of effect. Um, so yeah, a couple of things like that. But surprisingly, it was pretty easy to convert these spells into three-dimensional stuff that works underwater and so on. Um, it did take a lot of thinking and some play testing on some of them to get them working just right. And
Hmm.
we're going to continue to do that in second edition because they've changed things just enough where everything has to be looked at again.
Hmm.
Um, they're like, well, they just changed like two words here, but that changes the whole dynamic of how this works. So we have to look at this a little closer.
Yeah, I've talked about domino effects in design previously. How sometimes a tiny little change can snowball into bigger implications. Um,
right.
and of course, one of the big ones in the case of Pathfinder Second is that that game goes headfirst into expanding the way feats work. Uh,
Oh yeah.
instead of it being this quote unquote optional thing, even though for some classes it really wasn't. It is core to so many aspects of development. Uh, a lot of class
Yeah.
features are different forms of feats. There's different categories of feats, which I'm personally glad. Instead of having them in one big old list with a bunch of traps, I will never forgive
Right.
whoever designed all those prerequisites for whirlwind attack. Uh, and
Yeah. No, I agree.
and I'm guessing that with this conversion over to Pathfinder Second Edition, there's a lot of talk about what should be converted into feats, what should be folded into other feats if need be, and what should be converted into the action economy that it has.
Right. Yeah. It is more of an action based game, the second edition compared to first edition. Um, so we had to keep that in mind, without sacrificing the flavor of the setting. Um, so what we're doing, we have these, I guess these concepts that we don't want to sacrifice, because we want to keep the magic of being underwater, and then we have the negotiable ones. This list will sometimes change, but um, we want to keep it in a unique environment. And of course, in Cerulean Seas, you're not limited to staying under the water. There still is some land. The basic premise this is the world in which there was a catastrophic flood. So there were land dwellers at one point. Um, and then the flood came out and took them all out. And the ones that were left had to compete with the undersea races that could come up on land, which they were eventually driven to extinction. There was just not enough land to go around, and the undersea races were definitely more suited to the new environment. So over time, there was, the land races all kind of went extinct. There is still the option to go up on land, much like if you're in a land campaign, you can go underwater. Um, we designed the setting to be primarily aquatic, with the option to go on land for adventuring as well. And of course, being an aquatic race, you're going to be at a disadvantage when you're on land. And then there's some races are more suited to it than others, are more amphibious.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the concept, but the setting is not strictly detail oriented, because what we wanted it to be is more modular, where people could say, I want to run a campaign that's completely aquatic, like we present, or they can take facets or little bits and pieces of the book without getting too wrapped into a different setting. So if you wanted to run an underwater game in Glorian or a land-based world, you could still do that with our setting books. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't integrate the setting too deeply into the rules or the races or anything such that. We wanted to be able for people to go in, pluck something out easily, and use it wherever they want to use it.
Yeah. Now, I do want to talk a bit about classes. Obviously, in the original book, you did have some adaptation suggestions for the existing classes, but in that first core book, you had 3 new classes: the Kahuna, the Mariner, and the Siren.
Yeah.
When it comes to those, were there any difficulties when it came to converting them, or did some of them have to go through more significant overhauls than others?
I think they were all a bit of a challenge. Kahuna is basically the druid. But we also went into it thinking that we need to make these somehow distinct. We just don't want a water druid and a water ranger. So we wanted to have them their own sort of feeling and flavor. So that, I think, was part of but we also wanted to film that particular niche that we were taking out. It was another bigger criticism, because everybody has their favorite class, and when it's not in the new book, people got very upset. Like, I wanted to play a druid, and there's no druids. So we did eventually end up adding those races back in other source books, but initially we took them out and we redesigned them. The Marauder is more of a movement-based class than the Ranger is, and the Kahuna definitely is a water-based druid, but we gave it its own particular unique flavor. And the Siren is still a bard, but we wanted to capitalize on some of the unique sound effects underwater and so on, because sound does behave a little different underwater. And we wanted to, incorporate that whole idea of the sea singer, the siren that can mystify and charm. So, put a new bard for that. Later on, we did redevelop the bard. Now we had to rethink underwater music and instruments and stuff. We actually got in contact with a band, a real life band, called Aquasonic. And when you get some time, look them up. It's quite remarkable. They've designed musical instruments and even vocal talent that actually submerge themselves in large aquariums and produce music. And we made an underwater bard that uses that type of thing. So it turns out percussion works just fine underwater. So you can use drums and cymbals and so on, but also stringed instruments. So anytime you're creating a friction-based sound, like a violin, another classic one is putting your finger on the top of a glass and having that sort of friction effect. That works really well underwater and creates a very interesting sound. Now the instruments do sound different, so it's kind of like a haunting, echoey sound. It sounds otherworldly. But it's also very pleasant and it's very soothing. So it's kind of interesting things that you eventually think like, well, this is going to be too hard to do, and then you research it and you look it up and you figure out the nuances and find out other people have thought about this too, and even maybe practiced it. Like in the case of Aquasonic, they make a living off of creating music underwater. So. And then you're like, well, we have to rethink this. I think in the first edition, the second edition remake, we are going to include all the base classes that you see. We also add a few new ones.
Yeah.
And with everything we've learned.
I would ask a similar thing with prestige classes, but fortunately, second edition already has a built-in and a baked-in way to handle prestige classes. It's kind of their own little for lack of a better term, feat chain in a intro and exit kind of way. Same thing goes with archetypes. And so some of these things we have to be scrapped, like some of our old prestige classes. And then we're also looking at psionics, because our second book actually that ever came out was called Waves of Thought, and it's on Dreamscard. It's based on Dreamscard Press's Psionics Unleashed books that they came out with, which was a great series. And we worked very closely with the authors and the company on coming out with Waves of Thought, which was our second book in the Cerulean Sea series. And we developed psionics for the underwater, and it kind of carried through the other books. There's always a little touch of psionics in there. We made the underwater a very psionic environment. So second edition, and now there's no psionics. Dreamscard has kind of shuttered their doors, and so we have a couple of options. We can either replace psionics with what Pathfinder will be coming out with here soon. Or we can, Illyria Publishing can come up with their own second edition psionics. And right now we're leaning towards the latter. I am still in contact with some of the old authors. Some of them are gone off completely, going silent. But we think that it's feasible. It would be its own source book. And that may be something that may come out before
before we continue on, we'll get the Cerulean Seas book out and then do a psionics book, perhaps. Like I said, it's not set in stone yet. And then maybe continue that legacy of psionics throughout Cerulean Seas. It was a big part of the original first edition series.
And I'm guessing, speaking of spells, when it comes to doing that translation, you're going to be working in with the whole 4 tradition thing that second edition has, along with deciding what spells would count as innate and what would count as focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we intend to keep the flavor of second edition as much as possible, and then add our own undersea elements. So we don't want to change anything that doesn't necessarily have to be changed for underwater. We do want to, one of the things we noticed that is if you keep familiar, people will adapt to it better. So the more familiar it is, the less you change that you don't have to change, the better. And any additional rules should be simple and add to the game rather than just subtract it. So that's we do have a couple of rules that we work with, and we toss it around the team. We have a very small team, but we do toss it around, and then we put it off to our playtesters. We have a couple of groups that work with us, and we take that feedback very seriously.
Yeah.
A lot of our playtesters are made up of our biggest cynics. So when someone gives us a bad review or like email, they hate this thing, it's like, you know what? You want to be a playtester? I really need your input, because as much as I sometimes hate the criticism, or I find it, so off base, I also need that. I need to stay grounded, and I need to know. I mean, you can't please everyone through, but you can also admit when you're wrong or when you can improve. And so a lot of my biggest, online enemies are also some of my favorite playtesters. They'll find things I didn't even think of.
Well, given the fact that Herzog wrote a book about his time with Klaus Kinski and why he kept bringing him back, I can understand that.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not saying that any of your playtests are the equivalent of Klaus Kinski. Dear God, no, I wouldn't go that far. You've read up on him and how calling him batshit crazy is quaint. But
yeah, we don't put up with abuse, but we'll think about everything else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it's gotten to the point where the natives for a film you're working on were actively considering putting out a hit on the guy, I think we've crossed a bit of a threshold, and I wish I was kidding on that. They actively approached Herzog saying, "Hey, we will pay somebody to assassinate that guy because of how much of a problem he is." And Herzog was like, "No, I need him for the rest of the film." Yeah. But obviously, one of the other things that's expanded from first to second is the importance of races, whether or ancestry. But I still end up calling it race just because one, old habits die hard, and two, it's the same destination at the end of the day. But there's the fact that that it's expanded to have feats across the character development. And I'm guessing in that vein, some of the races from Cerulean Seas are going to be expanded in terms of what they bring to account for that whole feat development.
Definitely, they do. Actually, it meshes up well on certain spectrums with races and ancestries and heritages and so on. Because originally with Cerulean Seas, we had it divided into sort of like categories of races. So we had anthropomorphs, which are sort of like animal, like crabmen and fish people and so on. And then we had merfolk, and then we had different types of merfolk. And then we had what we called Fakia, which were sort of like the elves and the nixies and the stuff, the fairy type creatures. So we already kind of were doing that. We were using different names. So we did move that over, or they're much broader categories than they are in regular Pathfinder. But the ancestries are these broad categories of merfolk and fakets and anthropomorphs and so on. And then we have the heritages beyond that, were the different types of merfolk, and it worked out really well. It plunked in there better than it did in first edition. So you can build on that, because each different category had it had its rules, and then you have the race underneath it that had stuff that it added or changed. And that works really well second edition. So the heritage slash ancestry system that they have has worked, and we're thinking about making like bloodlines, or we haven't decided on the we're still debating on that, but another third category to narrow it down, because there are a lot of races in Cerulean Seas. Each new source book came out with them, and then we have another book of races based on the remarkable races. Another product of Loria Publishing is the Remarkable Races, and it's just a book of weird races. They're really off the walls, strange races, and I recommend looking at them. They become pretty popular. A lot of people know what an Obito is, and a Squall, and things like that. Very strange races that you always wanted to play but never had the rules for. But we converted that over to Cerulean Seas, so we made aquatic flavored versions of those. And each book, each source book, there's 6 source books altogether, expansions, comes out with new races and new flavors of races. So you'll have a particular type of what we call the sea folk, which is kind of our generic merfolk, which is your classic merfolk. Mm-hmm. But then you also have an indigo ice, which is our polar version. We have the Arctic sea folk, so they're a little bit hardier and definitely more survivable in a frosty environment. So, but yeah, the ancestries are going to be quite diverse in the Cerulean Sea still, and we're going to keep that going. I kind of like the feeling where the ocean, an ocean world especially, would be so huge compared to a land-based world. There would be so much diversity. It's just like there's so many different creatures in the sea, and the variety is astounding. That we want that reflected in the races and the monsters and the regions of that particular universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, was there anything that was in Cerulean First Edition that, no matter that, had to be like a painful cut, like it just would not be compatible with Second Edition?
Well, the prestige, we kind of like really went into the prestige class category, I guess, with Cerulean Seas and a lot of our remarkable races even. When Pathfinder came out, prestige classes carried over from 3.5. And they were a lot more popular when it first came out, and they kind of lost popularity, and they've metamorphed beyond that, and it became the second edition's new mechanic. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't quite work the same or in the ways that we like it. So we are replacing that. We're keeping some of the flavor of some of them. So we're not just going to toss it out the window. We're going to take what we can from it, but we got rid of a lot of the prestige classes as they were. So
yeah, because prestige classes and class archetypes work similarly, that does require a bit of a readjustment.
It does. And there were mechanics like class archetype and a few other ones that came out after Pathfinder. They're starting to get going a few years that we never, because Cerulean Seas came out right at the beginning, right as Pathfinder came out, because we were actually going to release it originally for 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, but we were so slow at it that 4th edition and Pathfinder kind of split while we were messing around with it, trying to get it ready to go. and we had a fork. Basically, we could go, okay, we can go to 4th edition, and that's going to be really, really different than our 3.5, and it's going to be a lot more work. Or we can go with Pathfinder, and just a kind of almost painless conversion. We definitely were leaning towards Pathfinder, but we thought that the main group would go with 4th edition when it first happened. So we put out Remarkable Races in 4th edition, and it flopped. We had almost no one interested. And we're like, well, maybe our time is done here. And then we put it out in Pathfinder, and it took off. So it was definitely okay. That was our sign that Pathfinder was the way to go. And we almost within a year of releasing Remarkable Races in 4th edition, we came out with Cerulean Seas and Pathfinder. So Pathfinder was only about a year old when Cerulean Seas first came out. There were a lot of rules we didn't have yet. I mean, right now it was just the main core rule book and maybe a bestiary or so that was already out by the time Pathfinder. So they had Ultimate Combat. They had, a ton of books come out. It's an entire library come out since then.
Oh, yeah.
And most of our Cerulean Seas development was right after Pathfinder came out. So we missed a lot of things. And we're going to make up for that in 2nd edition. So there's a little bit of backlog we have to work on some of these things. We never did update it to newer rules. We never got around to it. We were happy. People were just happy playing it the way it was. So there wasn't a huge demand. But as time goes on, people want to see this in 2nd edition. Have enough people interested. I said, okay, it's time. Let's do it.
Yeah, I can certainly see it. And with that in mind, for the core book for Cerulean Seas 2nd edition, what are you shooting for as far as a page count goes?
Right now we're right about 500 pages, which is a bit long. This is pre-editing, still playtesting document. So yeah, we're still looking at a 300 to 500 page book. Now, what we may do is take a lot of that out and put it in further books. There's a pretty good bestiary section like it in the original book, and that got out of hand because we have so many monsters that we wanted to include. We need this monster, we need to use this monster, and that we're going to have to cut that down a bit, though. And of course, spells. You have almost 200 pages of spells there and stuff like that. So we're definitely have some editing to do. But I think I would like to shoot for around 300 pages. That's pretty close to the original, and that gives us plenty of material to put out pretty quickly to new source books.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. I mean, the original book was about 290 pages. Give or take a few, because obviously I'm looking at the PDF version. And I could easily see it shooting for that. Some of the depending on how closely it tries to mirror the formatting of the core book.
Right.
Although I do offer my sincere apologies for having to put up with the character sheets, at least the official character sheets for Pathfinder 2nd edition, because they are, and I say this with all due care, with no excess emotion, they are the ugliest character sheets I've seen in quite a while.
Yeah. Well, you will see a Cerulean Seas character sheet, and we'd like to think it is pretty pretty.
Yeah. Like the character sheets that were done for the playtest look better than the final ones. It just And I know I'm not the only one who's said that, because the Pathfinder 2e default character sheet does not pass the eye test.
No. It's hard to design character sheets. I've been doing it. I don't know how many I designed. Probably about 24 now. And you've missed stuff. Or the eyes don't like everybody's eyes are different, of where they're going to look for stuff, and half the time I get it done and I miss like 2 or 3 things. I'm like, oh darn it, and I can't figure out where to put this now. But yeah, you're putting a lot of information in a very small space, or you're putting a lot of information in too big of space, and you have too many pages going on. So yeah. It's not a fun task.
The thing that had me,
but I do.
The thing that had me triggered with the default one with Pathfinder was wasted space.
Yeah, exactly. Don't waste any space. Big empty space looks bad, and there's plenty of stuff to put there. There's a lot, and I like pretty over functional, but that's not everyone agrees with me. So
I know
it definitely has to be pretty though.
Yeah, I know some people want to insist on having just one page, but we saw how that we saw how that worked out with White Wolf.
Yeah, no, it's going to be our main. Of course, there's for other classes there's more pages, but for our main thing, it is a 2-page character sheet. But
yeah,
that's because we like to put some art and design on there as well, so fill out that white space a little.
Yeah, so it isn't just pure unadulterated raw text, which
exactly.
When people see that, some people are going to have their eyes glazed looking at that kind of thing. Oh,
yeah. That is sort of Illuria's philosophy. Illuria Publishing, we want to make it pretty, so everything's going to be full color. Everything. We try to get our best artists. I mean, our artwork does vary because we're not rich, but we do have some very, very talented artists that work with it, and we fill as much art as we can in these books, as high quality as we can get, considering the budget. But I think we do pretty good, and we get a lot of compliments on it. So we for Cerulean Seas especially, it wouldn't work out quite as well if it wasn't so beautiful.
Yeah.
Because I do find that particular world underwater is quite breathtaking.
Or horrifying if you're dealing with the deep sea.
Or horrifying. Yeah, we do have a source book called Azure Abyss. Everything's alliteration, and we have separate ways of thought. I guess we just threw that out the window. But Indigo Ice, Azure Abyss is our deep sea one, and we kind of made that. Everything is kind of fluorescent, So you got all these bioluminescent creatures and so on. So we kept the theme very dark with sort of neon colors, and that worked out pretty cool. We like that. So
yeah,
So Azure Abyss. Sorry.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And I will definitely be looking forward to seeing how Cerulean Seas develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens here. And
it was a pleasure to be here.
Anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, thanks for having me.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.